Now on Newsmax Exclusive, Egypt descends into chaos amidst a deadly crackdown by the military-backed government. Former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld takes aim at the Obama administration for what he calls its botched handling of the situation.
And are cooler heads prevailing? Anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist joins us with a GOP Obamacare strategy he thinks even the president could go for.
Then Colonel Robert Brown on why he says he is the soldier of fortune.
And in money news, Lawrence McDonald on whether to buy stocks or bonds.
And bluegrass master Ricky Skaggs on his life and music. Newsmax Exclusive starts now.
Hello and welcome to Newsmax Exclusive, where you'll see this week's best interviews from Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman.
And I'm Kathleen Walter.
The Muslim Brotherhood is vowing to bring down Egypt's military coup, and concerns are mounting that Egypt could be turning into the next Syria, descending into civil war.
This after Egypt's military-backed government clashed with demonstrators seeking the reinstatement of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. More than 500 people were killed when the military broke up two camps in Cairo. Vice President al-Baradi resigned. President Obama, vacationing with his family on Martha's Vineyard, reacted to the violence.
The United States strongly condemns the steps that have been taken by Egypt's interim government and security forces. We deplore violence against civilians.
The president canceled joint military training exercises with Egypt. He did not withdraw the $1.5 billion in annual U.S. aid to Egypt. Former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld kicks off this edition of Newsmax Exclusive. He says President Obama's botched handling of Egypt threatens the entire Middle East.
Well, I think that the new Secretary of State, Mr. Kerry, has been dealt a difficult hand. The Obama administration and the Hillary Clinton Secretary of State handling of that earlier, it seemed to me, was not terribly skillful. The idea that you could have early elections and have anybody win other than the Muslim Brotherhood, which is not secular, as someone in the Obama administration had suggested, the Director of National Intelligence, it's not secular, it's Islamist. And because they're the best organized and the toughest and the most ruthless, they won the election and control of the parliament. And the effect has been that they've tried to impose a rule over the Egyptian people, which is not what the people who had demonstrated in Tahrir Square wanted. And as a result, there was a rejection of Mr. Morsi, who'd been elected. I think the critical relationship is between the United States and the Egyptian military, which has been developed over a period of decades now, thanks to Anwar Sadat many years ago, and that has been an anchor of stability in the country and in the region.
Mr. Secretary, in response to the crackdown today, White House Deputy Press Secretary Josh Earnest said that the U.S. strongly condemns the crackdown and will keep up the pressure on Egyptian leaders to begin a transition to democracy. How do you view the administration's response? And do you agree with those Republicans who say we need to cut aid from Egypt?
I don't know if they're Republicans or Democrats saying it. I heard people from both parties suggest that, and I think it would be a very serious mistake. We are dealing with countries that have different cultures, different languages, different neighbors, different circumstances, and they're not going to behave like we behave. We've got to recognize that and to work with them. Egypt is an enormously important country.
Mr. Secretary, is there a concern that this could spiral into a civil war within Egypt? And what impact does an unstable Egypt have on the Middle East, and particularly Israel?
Well, certainly it could spiral into a civil war. I mean, we see what's going on in Syria. There have been somewhere between 80 and 100,000 people dead in Syria in opposition to the Assad regime. It's conceivable that could happen in Egypt. Egypt has been, given its arrangement with Israel, has been a enormously positive, stabilizing influence in that part of the world. And good Lord willing, it can continue to be that way if in fact the countries in the neighborhood and the people in Egypt behave in a responsible way. And they're not going to end up looking like we do. They're not going to behave like we do. I mean, if you think of the United States, we went through a civil war. Women didn't vote into the 1900s. We weren't like, in our evolution, we were not like we are today. And to expect that we shouldn't deal with Egypt and should cut off aid unless they're exactly like we are is kind of an unrealistic, juvenile attitude.
In the wake of recent embassy closures in the Middle East and North Africa, Secretary Rumsfeld also told us the Obama administration is de-emphasizing the threat from the Islamists and that the war on terror will last not years, but decades.
And former U.S. Representative Allen West reacts to a report that 400 surface-to-air missiles were stolen from a CIA annex in Benghazi and are now in the hands of al-Qaeda. West tells Newsmax in an exclusive interview that the Obama administration's claim of an al-Qaeda demise and retreat are premature. We asked him if the administration's killing of bin Laden, pulling troops out of the Middle East, and its reliance on drones is a viable anti-terror policy.
No, it's not a viable anti-terrorist strategy. You know, Osama bin Laden was one person. Osama bin Laden did not define the entire radical Islamic ideology. We're fighting against an ideology. We're not fighting against one person. And so if you don't go after the core of the ideologies, which is their thought process, what they believe in, and really it's about an information operations to erode their support, you're not going to win.
West says a select committee is needed to determine exactly what happened in Benghazi.
To delay or defund Obamacare, that is the question facing Republicans, whose ultimate goal is repeal of the unpopular law. In a Newsmax exclusive, the Americans for Tax Reform's Grover Norquist explains why a coalition of Republicans are pushing to delay the law for a year and why he's so convinced President Obama might actually go for it.
We have dozens and dozens of conservative groups from the Repeal Coalition, the effort to repeal Obamacare, that did a letter to the Republican leaders, and there are now 50 Republicans in the House who've co-sponsored Marsha Blackburn's legislation to delay the implementation of Obamacare for a year. Now, why? Well, our goal is to get rid of Obamacare and to replace it with a pro-consumer, pro-healthcare effort. But what can we do now that, as long as Obama's president and you have Harry Reid, left-wing Democrat, running the U.S. Senate? I believe, and a growing number of others do, that we could get a one-year delay.
And Grover, some Republicans like Senators Mike Lee of Utah and Ted Cruz of Texas and Marco Rubio of Florida are threatening to allow a government shutdown until Republicans vote to defund the health care law. Why do you think that this is the wrong way to go, and would this proposal hurt the GOP?
Imagine if the Democrats had control of the House and they went to a Republican Senate, Republican president and said, you have to give us gun control or we'll close the government. The Republicans wouldn't consider budging. Well, you have to raise taxes or we'll shut down the government. Republicans would laugh at them.
Would a government shutdown hurt the GOP?
Well, who would explain why the government was being shut down? CBS, ABC, NBC, Time Magazine, The Washington Post. So it's a toss-up. Could we convince the country that we were trying to reform things and the president wouldn't? Maybe. I think it's more likely that if we're announcing we're looking to close the government down, that we'll get blame, credit, a responsibility for closing the government down. The reason why doing a one-year delay is a powerful message is that the president has already conceded that his plan is not ready.
Harry Reid recently said that Obamacare is absolutely a step toward a single-payer system. How do you view his remark?
Obamacare was set up to fail into single-payer. They had hoped to have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate so that every time something broke, it would get fixed in a way that drove us into single-payer. But a Republican House and a stronger Republican vote in the Senate has made it impossible. Every time there's been a failure, we've moved it in the opposite direction.
Gallup's daily tracking survey on Saturday showed the president at 41% approval. Now, in a speech recently, the president blamed Washington, saying that it had taken its eye off the ball. Is running against Washington a viable strategy for a president now 5 years into his administration?
There's a reason why there's stalemate in Washington. You have a left-wing Democrat, a left-wing Senate, and a conservative Reagan Republican House. Of course they're not going to agree. That's progress from when the Democrats had all three and were able to do what they wanted to.
And the president recently offered Republicans, as you're aware, a so-called grand bargain, which would lower the corporate tax rate from 35% to 28%, close some loopholes in return for supposed investments in jobs. In your view, is this enough to turn around our dismal economy?
No, it wouldn't help. What the president's plan is, he says tax reform, but he views tax reform as a Trojan horse, inside of which he has $1 trillion tax increase. So his plan is a tax hike over the next decade and a massive stimulus spending. This is a man who's learned nothing in 5 years. He wants another stimulus package, there have been 3 or 4, and another tax increase.
And the Obama administration wants to delay another Obamacare deadline, specifically the caps on out-of-pocket insurance costs, for a year. According to the Congressional Research Service, the administration has missed as many as a third of the deadlines under the Affordable Care Act.
One lawmaker is refusing a special Obamacare exemption made available to her and other members of Congress that average Americans won't receive. Representative Shelley Capito, a Republican from West Virginia, says she is rejecting a subsidy that pays for about 75% of the health care costs Washington lawmakers and their staffs will face in 2014. In fact, Capito is so upset she plans to introduce legislation banning other members of Congress from taking advantage of it.
I see it as an issue of fairness. I don't think that members of Congress should be treated in any kind of special category, and I think that the lawmakers that made this law, which I did not, I was vociferously against it, but should have to take the plan as they envisioned it.
Representative Capito is running for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Democratic Senator Jay Rockefeller in West Virginia. And the Government Accountability Office is probing the use of taxpayer funds by Planned Parenthood and other family planning groups after a Texas Planned Parenthood affiliate was forced to repay $4.3 million to resolve allegations of Medicaid fraud levied by a former employee. In a Newsmax exclusive, former U.S. Representative Marilyn Musgrave explains why the problem goes way beyond this one Texas clinic.
There will be more whistleblowers and really former employees coming forth from these clinics. There's so many things happening in this arena right now. When you think about the bright light that's being shed on clinics, whether they're Planned Parenthood clinics or other facilities that provide abortion, the things that we've seen in recent months have garnered a great deal of attention, and not just from the so-called pro-life community. I mean, people that care about women, taxpayers concerned about how their hard-earned tax dollars are spent, are very concerned that we find out what's going on in these facilities. And of course, Planned Parenthood is the giant in the industry, performing the most abortions in this country. And I believe the case in Texas will that will continue to create a lot of scrutiny.
The law does prohibit taxpayer dollars, federal funds, from paying for abortions specifically, but agencies such as Planned Parenthood, as you referenced here, do get millions of dollars each year, as long as that money pays for other services. Do you support, as Congressman Diane Black and others do, ending all federal funding for groups like Planned Parenthood?
I absolutely do, and I made that goal when I was first elected to the House in Colorado. I'm talking about the State House. I served in the House and the Senate in Colorado before I went on to Congress, because everybody knows that money is fungible. And I mean, it frees up more money for Planned Parenthood to perform abortions if they get taxpayer dollars for their other services, which, by the way, we know those services such as cancer screenings, and by the way, there's never been a mammogram ever done in a Planned Parenthood clinic in the United States of America, despite that lie being repeated over and over. They don't do mammograms, but they provide contraceptive services and other services that are declining. And they always like to kind of push the abortion part of it over to the other side, in regard to funding, and, that doesn't constitute much of our business. but Planned Parenthood is in the business of abortion, and they make their money on abortion.
Do you feel like if the funding was cut off for family planning groups like Planned Parenthood being the biggest one, if that funding was completely eliminated, that trend would continue? There would continue to be a reduction in the number of abortions nationwide?
Well, I absolutely believe that.
Musgrave added that the pro-life debate is likely to figure prominently in the 2014 midterm elections and the 2016 presidential race, adding that she believes the nation is becoming more pro-life. And next on Newsmax Exclusive.
He's logged thousands of miles as a mercenary journalist, trotting to war zones from South America to Southeast Asia, even Afghanistan. The founder of Soldier of Fortune magazine explains why he is the soldier of fortune next.
Plus, with speculation Ben Bernanke will taper quantitative easing, is now the time to jump into the bond market. That's next in Money News.
And a life in bluegrass comes full circle. Our exclusive interview with country music artist Ricky Skaggs when Newsmax Exclusive returns.
He is the founder of Soldier of Fortune magazine, a former Army Green Beret, and he's logged more miles globetrotting to war zones from South America to Southeast Asia and even Afghanistan. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Brown sat down with us for a Newsmax exclusive about his new book titled I Am Soldier of Fortune, His Life in the Military, being a mercenary/journalist, and all the highs and lows that came with his incredibly unique career.
Well, there's no question my time as a Green Beret team leader in Vietnam was the most challenging position and opportunity that I've ever had in my life. And as I've said over the years, I don't claim to have been the best, but it certainly was the most challenging position in the respect that I was responsible for the lives of about 1,000 people, including 576 mercenary tribesmen fighting the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. I was the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Health, Education, and Welfare, the Minister of Housing, and it was, as I said, an incredible adrenaline rush as well as an incredible challenge, and very, very satisfying. Nothing has ever matched that, and I don't expect at this point in time it ever will.
I remember reading that your team of journalists also created the news that they were reporting on. Now, that idea basically goes against everything they teach you in journalism school. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but did that ever cause you any issues when yourself or your team would run up against journalists from the media establishment?
Well, we weren't appreciated by the mainstream journalists, in fact, any journalist for the most part. Most journalists took exception to the fact that we carried guns everywhere we went, and if we get fired upon, we fired back. That being said, we really didn't give a hoot what the other journalists said, and needless to say, none of them ever wanted to challenge us physically.
The idea of a soldier of fortune, is it still alive and well today?
One could make the observation that soldiers of fortune, quote, close quote, have morphed into contractors like Blackwater, etc., in which people employ their military skills. And once again, it depends how you want to describe soldier of fortune. Somebody that works for profit in a dangerous situation, well, that certainly would apply to contractors. So it's not like it used to be, but on the same token, it'll do.
We also asked Lieutenant Colonel Brown, who spent a lot of time in Afghanistan in the 1980s fighting alongside the Mujahideen against the Soviets, if any military power, including the U.S., could ever help that nation achieve a higher level of stability. He told us he simply does not have an answer.
Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke will probably reduce the central bank's $85 billion in monthly bond purchases next month. That's according to 65% of economists surveyed by Bloomberg. So we asked Lawrence McDonald, senior director at the brokerage firm Newedge, if it's a better time to buy bonds than stocks. Our David Nelson has the interview in this Newsmax exclusive.
Larry, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, David.
Larry, walk me through this. You know, markets are at all-time highs. And everywhere I turn, talking heads are telling me I've got to dump bonds and get into stocks right now. You're kind of walking the other way. Tell me why.
Well, complacency is very, very high right now. In other words, the amount of bulls in the market over the last couple of months is really at multi-year high. So a lot of people are bullish. But the thing that gets me the most concerned is during the great equity runs in the 90s and the 80s, very few people were heading into retirement. Today, every day, today, tomorrow, the next day, 4,100 people in the United States every single day are turning 65. And 10 years ago, that number was only 1,100. So in 2003, every day, 1,100 people were turning 65. Bottom line is, people 65 and over really, common sense, they have to have a good chunk of their money in bonds. So I think this great rotation will happen over time, but it's not going to be this easy layup back into stocks.
We have yields right now in the 10-year in the mid-twos. I'm not sure where we are right today. What's your target? I mean, do you think bonds are actually, do you think the yields are going to come back down a little? We're going to back up?
Yeah, I think that, I think we're going to, right now we're at 264, so okay. We're going to head back down toward the 220 range.
What's going to get us there? I mean, is it going to be some kind of scare in the market? Would it be bad economic data that would, think that the Fed is going to continue QE longer?
Well, that's it. I mean, you've got, think about the last 4 or 5 months. Oil's moved up $22 from the lows, and every $10 that oil moves higher takes about 0.25% off of GDP. So in other words, $20 equals about 0.5% off of GDP. And then you just have everything that's gone on with sequestration, the rising taxes in the United States, the amount of young people that aren't working. There's just a lot of secular problems with the economy that I think will rear their ugly head more in the second half.
A lot of strategists out there have been pointing, to stocks as an attractive place to grab some yield. And I can understand the concept that, maybe we're going to pull back here, but isn't there a bigger danger that some investors, especially retail investors, might try to trade around that move and avoid that dip in the market and perhaps miss the next big leg up?
If you're sitting at home right now and you want to know what to do with your money, you want to sit in the boat and wait for some fear. And that's when you want to get in.
Larry, thanks so much for your valuable time.
Great to see you.
Another reason why Lawrence McDonald is somewhat bearish on stocks and bullish on bonds is because Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke is leaving at the end of his term, and that the selection of the next chairman, perhaps Janet Yellen or Larry Summers, will likely have a big impact on the market.
And coming up on Newsmax Exclusive, summer sun and skincare. Dr. Justin Piasecki joins us to explain how you can protect your skin from those dangerous UV rays.
Plus, legendary country music artist Ricky Skaggs opens up about faith, family, and the resurgence of his bluegrass music. That's coming up. Dr. Justin Piasecki isn't just another pretty face. The pioneering skincare expert was named the most beautiful doctor in America by the Doctors TV show. And he is also spreading the word about how to keep safe from skin cancer. Dr. Piasecki joined us on Newsmax Health to talk about the steps you should take to protect yourself from skin cancer.
The key to understand is a big picture perspective that skin cancer comes from a cumulative exposure to UV radiation, i.e. sunlight, over a long period of time. So the one ingredient that you need to add to your daily activities is sunscreen. And everybody knows sunscreen is important. What most people forget is that sunscreen stops working after 2 to 3 hours. So the mistake most folks make is not reapplying it regularly enough. It should be reapplied every 2 to 3 hours.
And doctor, when it comes to skin cancer, are self-examinations worthwhile? Can a layperson tell the difference between a regular freckle or mole and skin cancer?
Absolutely. You don't. It's not a prerequisite to have gone to medical school to evaluate your own skin. The key components that you want to look for are change, and I recommend looking and being familiar with your skin every month, either on the first of the month or on your birthday, just a day that you'll remember to do it. Take another 10 to 15 minutes in the shower when you're completely naked to look over your skin surface and be familiar with what's there. And as I said, the key component is change, something that's different than it once was. and something that's a little bit odd, maybe a change in the color, a change in the size of a lesion, an area that bleeds with minimal trauma, or a wound that won't heal.
We all know that tanning beds are a no-no because they can cause cancer. How do you feel about spray tans?
Tanning beds are to skin cancer what cigarettes are to lung cancer, and regular use of tanning beds, we believe, increases the risk of melanoma, which is a deadly form of skin cancer, by approximately 75%. You know, get a spray tan. Don't go to a tanning bed.
And Dr. Piasecki has pioneered a type of skin cancer surgery called plastic micrographic surgery. Patients can have reconstructive surgery following their cancer excision or Mohs surgery in the same setting.
Well, he obviously practiced what he preaches with his, you know, he's a handsome man.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, coming up next on Newsmax Exclusive, a bluegrass life comes full circle. One of the top country music artists of our time, Ricky Skaggs, joins us next on Newsmax Exclusive.
And finally on Newsmax Exclusive, one of the top 100 country music artists of all time.
We talk with legendary country music artist Ricky Skaggs, a Grammy Award winner 14 times over, about his faith, his family, and the resurgence of bluegrass music.
Well, I tell you, when I hear groups like Mumford & Son, Avett Brothers, people like that that are really taking the music to a completely different audience, it's very rewarding. When I see a banjo up there, even right along with their kick drum, you know, there's something cool about that, you know. And you know, I started playing bluegrass when I was just a kid, then went into more commercial country music after I left Emmylou Harris's band in 1980. Came to Nashville and got a record deal and started having a lot of country music hits, but I always try to bring my bluegrass sound even to country music. And I think that's one of the things that made me successful in the early 80s, was trying to bring and bridge those two kind of music genres together. Because really, I think bluegrass music and traditional music is one of the oldest pure forms, and even today I think is one of the most pure forms of country music that there is.
People might be surprised to hear that you would work with a guy like Jack White, who has an entirely different style and approach to music, even though some of the foundations are the same. But you say collaboration like that was the result of something you call staying open to God moments. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I just think, you know, if we're just open to God's direction in our life, I think He'll take us places that that we never dreamed that we'd get a chance to go to.
You know, you experienced a lot of critical acclaim and success throughout your career, but your personal life hasn't always been easy. You talk about your first marriage ending in divorce, and also a strange story. Your son, Andrew, was the victim of a random act of violence and was shot. Tell us about that and what those life lessons taught you.
Well, that was one of the hardest times in my life, was when he got shot. I don't know, I thought my world had come to an end, and I caught a plane, flew to Roanoke, Virginia, and spent hours and days there with him, you know. But just seeing my son in a hospital with a bullet hole right here in his face, you know, that was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life. But thank God he came through it. He's about 35 years old now, and he's got 2 children, my 2 grandchildren, and is doing great. I'm so proud of him.
I also want to talk to you a little bit about modern country music. I want to get your take on it. It's more popular than ever, but it also seems to be a lot more flashy than it was, say, 10 or 20 years ago. What do you think about modern country music?
Well, it's not the country music that I grew up with and that I played, you know, in the 80s. But I'm sure the music I played in the 80s is not quite what you know, Hank Williams and Johnny Cash and people like that was playing in the 40s and 50s. And 60s. So, you know, music has got to always develop and always keep pushing boundaries. I mean, I try to do the same thing with the bluegrass music that I do today. But, you know, I think these kids they're very respectful when I'm around, you know. I mean, when I see Keith Urban, you know, at the Grand Ole Opry, he comes up and says, man, you know, I love you, and, you know, you're a great inspiration to me, you know, your early records, you know, and so I know that good seed fell on good soil somewhere, you know, in my career, and it makes me feel good to see that these people are out playing good music but they're also paying tribute and honoring the past and honoring people that inspired them, because I've always been about that with Bill Monroe and Flatt and Scruggs and the Stanley Brothers.
Well, Skaggs is not slowing down. Along with his new book, Kentucky Traveler, he's also got a new record out and an upcoming tour this fall with another great musician, Bruce Hornsby. And everybody should check that out if they can. That's going to do it for this edition of Newsmax Exclusive. Thanks for being with us. And be sure to stay with Newsmax.com, Money News, and Newsmax Health for more of our exclusive interviews and content.
Have a good one.